Mountain Pony and the Elkhorn Mystery by Henry V. Larom. Published by Grosset and Dunlap. The author wishes to thank Forrester Esmond W. Sears of the New York State Conservation Department for his technical help and criticism of the chapters concerning fires. Chapter 1. The Mysterious Trespasser. Andy Marvin rode to the top of the ridge, and pulling up Sonny, his sorrel horse, he looked down for the first time on his ranch. The long main building made of squared logs, the tiny bunkhouse with the corrugated tin roof, the corral, and the little saddle horse, and the field of alfalfa, and the tiny brook flashing through the grove of cottonwood trees. 160 acres of farm and range land were, after 3 years of saving, his very own. "Doggone it, Sally," he said to the blonde-haired girl who had ridden up beside him. "Isn't that the most beautiful sight you've ever saw?" "At a distance," Sally said practically, "it sure is. But when I think of what you're going to have to do to make it into a working outfit, it makes me shudder. Boy, it'll take a lot of time." "That's about all I got plenty of," Andy said. "I spent all the money." 3 years before, Andy had come to the West to visit his Uncle Wes Marvin and Sally, Wes's adopted daughter, and right then he had fallen in love with the Rocky Mountains. Determined to make them his home, he had spent every summer working and saving his money, and with the help of a lucky horse sale, he finally made enough to buy this little homestead. Of course, he knew that if you looked closely, you could see the corral was a mass of broken poles and leaning posts held up by baling wire. The field, which had once carried a fine mixture of alfalfa and timothy, was overgrown, and the timothy had pretty well died out. The irrigation ditches were full of silt, and the head gates needed repairing. Just the same, sitting his own horse on his own range was a mighty fine big thrill. And Andy shifted in the saddle. This summer was going to be different, though, he thought. He would miss riding around with dudes, horse wrangling, and crazy adventures in the high country. As though reading his mind, Sally said, "No more excitement, Andy. You're a farmhand now." "Yeah," Andy said absently, his eyes on the main building. "But it'll be worth it. After all, building up your own ranch is an adventure. Say," he leaned forward in the saddle, "looks like I've got a visitor even before I set foot on the place. Who's that?" Following his gaze, Sally saw something move at the far side of the main house. A man came through the kitchen door with a shovel over his shoulder. He walked into the yard and stood for a moment looking around as though undecided what to do next, and then started toward an old root cellar across the ranch driveway. Reaching the door, he opened it and was just going in when, raising his head, he noticed Sally and Andy sitting their horses on the hill. He slammed the door down with such a bang that the sound drifted up to the two horsemen, and throwing down the shovel, he ran out of sight under a cottonwood. "Let's take a look at that guy," Andy said, pushing Sonny off the ridge. "I don't think I want trespassers." But before they had reached the bottom, they heard the roar of an exhaust, and a small pickup truck ripped out from under the tree, careened down the drive, through the gate, and onto the main road. At the end of the pasture, it banked the turn on 2 wheels, and with the driver leaning forward like a jockey on a racehorse, it tore over the top of the hill in a cloud of dust. Andy pulled up in the yard. "That guy sure was in a hurry to vamoose out of here," he said, scratching an ear. "Wonder what he was up to." Sally grinned. "There you go," she said. "Looking for a mystery. This place hasn't been lived in since the Worthingtons left. Lots of tramps and tumbleweeds of one sort or another have hung out here to keep out of the rain." "First time I saw a tramp in a pickup truck," Andy said, dismounting and tying Sonny to a sagging hitching rail. Walking past the old teepee poles held together by an ancient wagon wheel which gave the ranch its name, the wigwam, They entered the main house, and Andy soon realized what a tremendous job he had ahead of him. The kitchen stove was so rusted that it would probably be useless. There was no running water other than the brook that ran past the corral. The chink in between the squared logs was falling away in so many places light showed through, and wherever they went they were preceded by scratching, scrabbling noises that made Sally jump nervously. "I'm gonna have to fight my way in here at first," Andy said. "The pack rats outnumber me. Say, look at the living room. It sure is arty." Squatting in the center of the room like an immense iron toad was a big stove decorated with all kinds of nickel-plated curlicues. And instead of bare logs, the walls were covered all the way to the roof in an ancient brown burlap, to which had been glued hundreds of stars cut from silver paper. "All of this will have to come down pronto," Andy said. "It's a pack rat's paradise." "Looks to me as though somebody already started to do the job," Sally said. "Look at the mess." Andy saw big rents in the burlap where it had been ripped out to expose the cracks between logs. Someone had obviously been tearing at it recently. Bits of rats' nests and several pairs of ancient underwear used for winter chinking had been pulled out, and arms and legs of red flannel hung down dejectedly on the floor. "The Worthington boys sure knew what they had to do with their old union suits," Sally said, shaking her head. "Andy, you're going to work hard to make this room livable." But Andy wasn't listening. "Why?" he asked dreamily. "Why was that guy in here digging at the walls?" "He must have been looking for something," Sally said. "Looking for what?" There was a gleam in Andy's eyes. It always came, a glitter of excitement, at the least sign of a mystery. "Let's take a look around outside," he said. Walking past the tangled corral, they entered a tiny cabin that had once served as a bunkhouse. "This is more like it," Andy said. "This place is tight." His eyes roved over the little sheet iron stove, the double-decker bunk, against the wall. The sturdy logs chinked with cement. "This is where I'm going to live." "You're not going to move in yet, are you?" Sally asked. "Tomorrow," Andy answered. "No tramps and pickups are going to move in with me either. This is my place, and I'm going to do the messing around." They had left the cabin and worked their way through a tangle of wire and rotting corral poles when Andy paused. "Now look at that," he said. "Why did your tumbleweed friend dig holes in the ground?" He squatted down and examined a series of shallow cuts, almost a trench, along the side of the little saddle house. The spade marks were plain and fresh. "It is kind of strange." Sally ran her hand through her short golden bob. "I think we better ask Dad what he thinks anyway, before you come down here to live." Andy stood up and leaned against the saddle house wall. "What do you know about the Worthingtons, the people who own this place?" he asked. "Not much," Sally said. "Most of them were here before my time. The old man was a prospector. Then he married and homesteaded this place and raised a couple of boys. After they grew up and went away, and his wife died, he went right on living here. That's why the cabin is in such good shape. He died years ago, and Dad bought the ranch for you from one of the sons. The old man was a prospector, huh?" Andy kicked at one of the holes with the toe of his cow boot. "Now just suppose he buried something before he died," he went on dreamily. "A pokeful of gold dust, or—" Sally threw her head back and laughed. "There you go," she said. "Thinking up wild ideas. He quit prospecting years before he bought this place." "Okay," Andy tried to laugh with her. "But somebody, a guy who doesn't want to be seen, who runs away, was digging holes and pulling my living room to pieces. Why? What was he looking for? Why did he—" "Hey, what's that?" Sally broke in. Andy heard it too. Something scratching in the saddle house. It might have been a pack rat, except the noise was followed by a whine or a cry. With Sally close behind him, he ran to the corner and opened the sagging door. It was so dark inside that at first, coming in from the bright sunlight, Andy could see nothing. He paused and listened. Then, somewhere from the gloom, he heard something resembling a yelp or a tiny ghost of a bark. "Sounds like a dog," Andy said. He whistled, "Here, boy, come on out here." The bark came again, an urgent cry followed by scratching. Andy blundered into the room, stumbling over bits of broken pack saddle and empty saddle soup cans. "Come on, boy," he called. "Tell me where you are." Tripping over a box, he fell against what he decided must be an oat bin, and he felt along its edge until he came to the door. There was no doubt about it. The frantic whining was coming from inside. He found a rusty, closed hasp, and pulling it loose, he swung the door open. A white something, about the size of a pocket handkerchief, jumped out of the bin, shot across the floor, past Sally into the sunlight. Sally jumped back to let it pass, and turned to see where the animal had gone. It's some sort of kind of dog," she murmured wonderingly as Andy joined her. "And it's not much bigger than an underfed white mouse," Andy added. She looked like a smooth-haired fox terrier, Andy thought, except that everything was about half size, including the bark, which continued to issue from the tiny mouth together with the minute snarls. Andy squatted down and snapped his fingers. "Come here, little one," he said softly. "Come on over." The dog stopped barking and pricked up her ears, cocking her head slightly. "Come on," Andy said. "We won't hurt you." The dog lay down and put her head between her paws, and her button eyes watched Andy suspiciously. Andy went on talking to her quietly, but she didn't move until he stood up and took a step toward her. Immediately she was on her feet, zipping across the corral in a tiny cloud of dust, circling them on little springy legs, barking and saying plain as day, "You want me, huh? Well, come and get me if you think you can." Andy laughed. "She is sure a spunky little thing," he said. "What do we do about her?" Sally asked. "I wonder who she belongs to." Andy turned to her, and his eyes were thoughtful. "Funny," he said. "Darn queer. You know that little dog didn't get into that oat bin by herself." "Why not? She might have been hunting rats." Andy shook his head. The oat bin door was closed, and the hasp on it, a rusty thing, was shut. She was locked in there by somebody. "The guy with the shovel?" Andy nodded, and for a moment they stood silently, wondering why anyone would dig holes on an abandoned ranch, hide a midget dog in an oat bin, and then run away. Andy had forgotten to watch the terrier who was edging nearer until, looking down, Andy saw the little nose about to nuzzle his blue jeans. He reached down slowly toward the white body and the tiny black ears, and was about to touch them when the little dog jumped away and rushed all the way around the corral, scaring both horses at the hitching rail. "She's got a lot of pep," Andy said, "but she's crazy." "I think she's just been in that dark bin too long," Sally said, "and someone's mistreated her too. She's scared of people." "Well, she'll starve here. She's too small to follow the horses," Andy laughed. "If only I could catch her, I could stuff her in my vest pocket and pack her back to the ranch." He turned once more to the terrier. "Come on, jump into my pocket," he urged. "It's a free ride, little pup." They worked hard at it, and after a while they found themselves calling her Pocket, as though that were her real name. But although she kept them in sight, she refused to let them touch her, always springing away at the last moment. Finally, Andy straightened and walked over to his horse. "We'll just have to let her stay here," he said. "We'll go home and get her some food. And by the time we get back, she'll be so darn hungry that she won't get sassy with us." It wasn't until they had ridden over the first hill that they realized Pocket was still with them. To Andy's surprise, she was not just following them, but racing in and out of the sagebrush, putting up cottontail rabbits, and spooking Sonny so often that he shied and Andy had to grip hard with his knees. "She sure has speed," Andy said admiringly as the dog spurted ahead, jumping a 6-foot puddle like a miniature antelope. "Darndest animal I ever saw, but she'll have to stop at the river." A few minutes later, when Andy and Sally plunged their horses into the stream, sure enough, Pocket stopped on the bank to watch them, her stump of a high tail, her little ears cocked forward as though they were estimating the chances of following. Then, seeing that they had succeeded in crossing, she picked her way up to the bank and tested the water with her feet, like an old lady ready to go bathing. The river was still high with snow water, but as the urge to follow her new friends grew, she suddenly made up her mind. Picking a point that looked narrow, she circled back for a running start and catapulted her little body at the stream. The wild jump landed her full in the current. Her legs thrashed, her nose went under, and the river carried her off like a chip. Ahead of her was a whirlpool formed by driftwood jammed together in the channel. Here the swirling water was ready to suck her down under the drift and into the watery darkness. "Look, Andy, she'll drown," Sally yelled over the roar of the stream. "She'll never make it."